Everything burns. Jonathan Hickman's X-Men is all built to this moment, with Inferno #1 kicking off the final, for now, event of the Hickman X-Men era that started with House of X and Powers of 10. As expected, the first of 4 oversized issues follows up heavily on mysteries of House and Powers, primarily with a focus on Moira X, the secret mutant of House of X #2 with the mutant power of resurrection, now on her 10th lifeline with the knowledge of mutant survival into the distant future. Today I'll answer, what's the focus of Inferno and what mysteries may be solved? What is Moira X up to and how does it connect to Mystique and Destiny? Does Inferno live up to the hype? And theories and predictions for what's to come. Hey everybody, I'm Dave Busing, founder and editor-in-chief of comicbookherald.com. You are listening to Krakin Krakoa number 199. If you like the Comic Book Herald YouTube channel, please consider liking, subscribing, sharing, and commenting. It all helps me out a great deal. Casual Krakoa live today on this Wednesday, 9/29/2021, when Inferno #1 came out, will be a live event. I'll be with Blurred Without Fear and Verno of the Cerebros. We'll be doing a post-game report of Inferno #1. Come join us circa 5:40 Central Standard Time. I'll try to include a link here in the show notes and in the comments so you can come hang out with us live as we talk about this issue. You can find full X-Men reading orders over on comicbookherald.com. Spoilers for Discuss Comics will follow. Writer Jonathan Hickman, artist Valerio Schiti, colors David Curiel, letters Joe Sabino. Early in Inferno, Hickman is doubling down on the threat of Orchis, including a list of mutant attempts to destroy their Forge home base, not to be confused with the mutant named Forge, which circles the sun. Well, not the mutant, the base, right? But all these attempts have been mutant failures. We see Nimrod, now fully online, post Hickman's X-Men #20, dismantling Domino, Quentin Quire, and Wolverine with relative ease. In data pages, we learn that mutantkind has tried everything from Magneto pulling the Forge into the sun to King Brew leading his brood swarm to destroy the Forge. The big thing that's happening here, though, is that through these mutant attacks, Orchis is studying the patterns and clearly getting close to confirming mutant resurrection, something Jerry Duggan and Pepe Larraz are already exploring in the relaunched X-Men series. But also we have Karima, Omega Sentinel, beginning to lock in on the secret of Moira X that someone remembers. Uncovering resurrection is an inevitability, but exposing Moira's secret feels to me like a much greater threat. My biggest criticism here throughout Inferno #1 is that a lot of this setup could and arguably should have been what was happening throughout the Dawn of X and Reign of X. Like, why wasn't X-Force as a book more centrally focused on the unit constantly invading the Orchis Forge, which was apparently happening? Orchis, as an entity, definitely got downplayed throughout the Dawn and Reign in a way that did not maintain their presence necessarily and their threat level, which is why it needs to be re-amplified here. Like, I do think it's fair to look at this first issue and feel somewhat annoyed that it's mostly setup, when that's exactly what so much of Dawn and Reign have felt like. It would have made a lot of sense, honestly, for the TechNet assassin thread to have played out in some part of Excalibur, or for King Brew's brood swarm to get more shine in X-Men or even X-Force. I'm not going to harp on this too much beyond this point, but it is a fair knock. To enjoy Inferno, you really have to be able to turn off what could have been and just embrace what is. The core of Inferno is focused on Moira, so you have an extended flashback to Moira's third life when she's killed by Mystique, Destiny, and the Brotherhood. And the seed planted here is whether Moira was right to try to cure mutants, or at least whether or not she still believes she was right. Revisiting a scene and filling in a new perspective is a tried and true Hickmanism at this point, from Fantastic Four to East of Wex to Ten of Swords. And I'm certainly not bothered to see it here to get more from Moira and Destiny's fateful first encounter, seemingly here from Mystique or Destiny's perspective. The key awakening here is how Moira takes Destiny's lesson in Fiery Fire to here through lives 4 through 9, trying to angle for mutant survival, okay? Or rather, she takes that fiery lesson to heart. But here at the possible end, in Life 10, that doubt about her original dream, inspired by the horror of what Moira viewed as a mutant curse, it's back. It's all back. The scene of Moira revisiting her third life is kind of loaded. So here's an implication, and I don't know if it's the right one, but it's kind of my read. She's visiting the ruins of the facility where in her third life, she worked on Project Cure for mutantkind. In the 10th life, this facility also appears to have been destroyed. Visually, it's not exactly the same, but it's very similar. But then there's a panel cut of the Project Cure diary in Moira's hands, as if she retrieved it from this facility in Life 10, which implies Moira also worked on Project Cure in this lifeline. But if that was the case, shouldn't Destiny have ended her, right? Knowing she would do that and having promised to do so. Now, it's not an accident that the Life 10 diary has Moira listed with the surname McTaggart, which as far as we know is only her name in Life 10, otherwise she'd be Moira Kinross. So this is not the Project Cure from Lifeline #3. Likewise, just in X-Men continuity terms, we know Destiny died well before Moira's apparent fake death, at the hands of Mystique and the Brotherhood, mind you. So Moira could have ample time to develop develop the cure after Destiny was off the board, although potentially not before Destiny War Mystique, that Moira would need to be burned out of existence again because of this action. An alternate possibility here is that Project Cure is written in one of Destiny's diaries, which we saw Moira reading, and that's what Moira is carrying around instead, but that seems like a stretch. Either way, there's definitely a build here of Moira thinking maybe she had it right when she was trying for a cure for mutant kind. That is her real dream in this world of X-Men, where we know Professor X's dream, of course, was mutant and man integration. So Moira, as far as like status goes on Krakoa, is furious with Professor X and Magneto for generally not listening to her. What I viewed as a triumvirate in House of X and Powers of 10 quite clearly seems to have, destabilized and become almost solely the actions of Charles and Eric as the great men, quote unquote, scheme without involving much from Moira until things have soured and they need her. There's such a schism of distrust here that Professor and Magneto are having Moira tracked. Magneto and Professor X are wondering about allying with the machines because they're viewing Nimrod as inevitability. They're basically like, what if we teamed up with Orchis instead of trying to destroy them? That doesn't seem to be on Moira's wavelength, who reiterates the two things she said they could not allow are Nimrod and Destiny. It's interesting how cavalierly this suggestion is dismissed, considering it's been a long-running fan favorite that Moira might ultimately be scheming towards a mutant machine assimilation like we saw in the Powers of 10 timeline. Now, this is still a possibility, but Moira certainly puts on the front that it's not what she's driving towards with Eric and Charles, or at least she's too mad to really discuss it. One of the most interesting developments of the issue is that Moira is not completely flustered by Nimrod specifically. It feels the way she's talking about it like there's a chance, if they act swiftly, to actually defeat that threat. Her real fear is Destiny. Moira wants any chance of Destiny's resurrection erased and Mystique removed from power, which again raises the biggest question, why exactly? Up to this point, theories have prioritized Moira's scheming and working in ways that Destiny would not support, but Inferno #1 also emphasizes perhaps the greatest reason: fear. By and large, Moira's playing back on her heels in this issue, like she's not totally in control, and I'm wondering how much of that is an act for Charlie and Mags versus how she really feels. Like, really? She's going to spend her 10th and possibly final life mad and inactive? That does not check out. I definitely reiterate here that at the end of X-Men by Hickman, the first time we see Moira in that entire run, and the last time we've seen her before Inferno, she's reading Destiny's diaries. That doesn't actually come up here directly, but those secrets are still clearly to be told. Moira has more of a plan here, I suspect, than what she's letting on. The book's conclusion is a masterclass event first issue ending with Mystique nominating Destiny for the Council. I absolutely love Hickman bypassing the will they, won't they with Destiny and just going straight to she's here, let's do this. This is what I'm talking about when I talk about admiring Hickman's dedication and understanding of narrative velocity and his own frustrations with the line's in some ways pandemic-influenced stagnation. This moment of Destiny waltzing into Apocalypse's vacant seat, showing she's got the legs for it, and Valerio Schiti drawing the most perfectly grumpy Magneto you've ever seen reminds me of Breaking Bad Season 5, Episode 1 in all the right ways. The hype for the season was all about Walt and Hank and when would they come together, knowing, exactly what the other was, when it might happen, and it just dropped at the conclusion of the first episode. There's so much thrilling confidence in a creator delivering like this early, knowing full well they have more than enough story to work well beyond this mystery. Now, the how of Destiny's resurrection is the interesting part of the story. Sinister's betrayal is easy, right? Seemingly gave the last of the DNA to Professor X, but this is Mr. Sinister, drawn demonically here by Valerio Schiti. Let's not assume he's actually playing ball, right? A Cerebro helmet, how'd they get one of those to resurrect Destiny? Well, we saw a Magneto, or someone who looked like Magneto, steal one in Trial of Magneto. It's clearly those are out there as well. Orchis has fragments of the Cerebro sword. Emma may be amenable. There are options here to play around to bring Destiny back. I'm curious to see specifically, though, how we're going to actually see how that happened. Now, deliciously, Inferno #1 also moves a handful of other plot lines forward, and I want to touch on some of these briefly. One of the most entertaining is the continued mystery of Doug Ramsey, Warlock, and Krakoa. We read in a data page that Black Tom, connected thoroughly to Krakoa, is hallucinating machinery moving under his skin. He wants to give in to this presence. Then we see Doug in an inverse of a page from House and Powers, connecting with techno-organic infused Krakoan flora and gearing up his Warlock arm as he has a conversation in secret with Warlock and Krakoa. The implication here is that Warlock's phalanx techno-organic nature is infused with a sentient island, and that they have plans of their own. I'll be honest, I fully expected this thread to get dropped, not the Phalanx, but the secrets of Doug and Warlock, and it's exciting as hell that this does not seem to be the case. I have to call out here too some theories from CBH readers, writers, and pals that Doug is on the road to delivering the first man-machine-human hybrid, right? When we think about the importance of this character, Doug Ramsey may already be post-mutant symbiosis that those future timelines tease. Prior to the Quiet Council, we also see Bishop becoming the new captain commander of Krakoa, and Psylocke taking Gorgon's place, the empty place, as captain. Personally, I think this is one of the stranger, more procedural exercises in Inferno number 1. Like, why is the nominating of captains, a position which had very limited relevance beyond X-Men number 4 and 10 of Swords, worthy of pages in this packed finale? There are some of the most fun moments here, certainly, with Cyclops being Team Dad, Magic formalizing the tradition of brawls and Madripoor, but again, this feels more like a natural inclusion in the X-Men run that simply never happened. They never took time for it. I am curious if Bishop's leadership role will be more significant for the remainder of the event. Remember, as a character, Bishop has both feet in Marauders and working somewhat closely with the morally repugnant Beast. If there's a Krakoan schism, as I expect, which way does Bishop lean, and what does that mean for Krakoa's armed forces? Now, one of the bigger mysteries here is the issue actually opens the first pages of Emma Frost bringing back Charles, Xavier, and Magneto back to life through Krakoan Resurrection in a deliberate mirror of the opening of House of X, with Professor X famously saying, "To me, my X-Men," right? Now, the when and the why of this scene is the biggest question, okay? My theory here would be this is a flash forward. After Professor X and Magneto have been brought low at the end of Inferno, I think the read here is that Inferno will be about taking these, again, quote-unquote great men out of power in their secretive for the good of mutant-kind positions, and, again, bringing them low, making them just one of a body of mutant kind that knows their actions, that is more open, that is more transparent, that is not, as you know, in the words of Hamilton, right, not keeping it in the room where it happens, where you have more mutants in the room where it happens, where people are aware of what is going on and what Moira's plans are and what is the best interest for the survival of mutant kind, instead of Professor X and Magneto deciding for everyone. I just have to think that's where Inferno is going. So how does all this work as a follow-up to House of X, right? Does Inferno live up to the hype? Well, the grand experiment of X-Men was not what comic fans are used to, right? When a celebrated creator takes over a segment of the Marvel Universe, their control extends to their own books, and generally little else. Grant Morrison shapes the future of the X-Men, but titles like Uncanny X-Men continue along at the same time in the early 2000s, only vaguely reflecting the change, not really a piece of it. Hickman's Avengers drives the Marvel Universe towards Secret Wars, but, Rick Remender's Captain America or Access or Dan Slott's Spider-Man shape major characters in ways well outside Hickman's control, and then he needs to react. The Experiment, capital X, was not the traditional Hickman's vision for an X-Men comic, that he would plan and write and solely dictate. It was Hickman's vision for an integrated line of comics, all reflecting the same general plot points and narrative endpoints. In that way, The Dawn of X and Reign of X are the tightest collaborative story Marvel's ever told across that variety of titles. It most closely reflects Chris Claremont, Louis Simonson, and Ann Nesenti's work on an X-Men Universe comics from 1986 to 1989, but again, set across 3 to 5 times as many titles as once. It's a historic achievement. There's genuinely nothing quite like it in Marvel, but it is, by definition, not a singular vision, and that shows. I think here, in this jump to Inferno, you could quite genuinely have read only House of X and Powers of 10 and X-Men number 6 and number 20. 2 issues in a 21-issue run, and you are fully prepared, in large part, for Inferno number 1, right? I'm somewhat disappointed by the complete absence of the fact that Trial of Magneto, an event going on in X-Men Comics, is happening in publication terms right flipping now and is not referenced or alluded to or in any way really mentioned in this issue, right? There is a disconnect from what is happening in Inferno and what has been teased as and promoted as and oftentimes functioned as a very collaborative and tight and together line. And I think it is interesting as an experiment and as a thought process to consider, do we value the single vision and the one creator doing their thing and just sticking to it over a full line of collaboration when perhaps when it's as good as it can get, it still feels somewhat disconnected by the end of it? I don't have the answer on it. It's an interesting thing to continue considering. The Krakoan for the next issue, for Inferno number 2, is Destiny. Unsurprising in so many ways. I'm excited about Inferno number 1, right? This is a good event kickoff. I don't think it's great, but I do think it's good. And in so many ways, though, the best turn for Hickman's Inferno number 1 is to release on a day when it's actually not even my favorite X-Men comic. Sword number 8 is incredible, showcasing to me that while Hickman's grand scheming ends, Al Ewing's ready to ascend to Regent of the X Office, right? I think we are here. We are at the end of the Hickman experience. And again, until noted otherwise, this is going to be the end through Inferno, and I continue to be excited for that. I'm very interested in what mysteries this might unveil. But I think one thing I saw in Sword number 8 today is I continue to be most excited about the potential of this era, about things that are new and totally different from what we've seen in X-Men comics to this point. You know, there's all sorts of stuff that Inferno does not touch on here, and I'm curious if it will. Will Arakko come into play? Will the Great Ring come into play? What about Mars in general, right? What about everything that's happened in Swords and the new mutant position in the galaxy? What about the Phalanx? What about all the powers of 10? Timeline stuff, black holes, dominions. When and where and how might that come back? Will it come back? In this event, it's not here in the first issue. There's a lot that is, obviously. There's a lot to talk about with this issue and the mysteries and what the focus is. And not everything needs to be in there. But all that stuff still remain interesting mysteries and interesting questions for the future of the X-Line. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing for new future X-Men comics, and that keeps me consistently excited. Thanks everybody for listening. Thanks to those of you who support Comic Book Herald over on patreon.com/Comic Book Herald. Thanks to Jesse W., Megan Getman, Cole Weathers, Martin Lopez, Brent Bowser, Professor X3769, Richard Renz, Adam, Chris Merkvicka, Verisimilitude, Terranord, Ed Mackey, Glide Pinball Drew, Mike Solomons, Matt Mahoney, John Samander, and Joshua Bentley. Those are all the individuals in specifically the Mysterious Benefactors tier. Thank you very, very much. Again, tune in. Casual Krakoa. Find a link in the comments in the show notes. Join us at 5:40 Central Time here today on 9/29/2021. We'll be talking Inferno number 1. You can find all my stuff at comicbookherald.com, at Comic Book Herald Online. Look for the best comics ever in My Marvelous Year podcast for more from me. Thanks everybody for listening. And as always, enjoy the comics.